Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger1511 of the series. We would today start with a paper of Uziel Awret at the Inspire Institute, Alexandria, Virginia, United States. We have mentioned him before, and he is very much into holograms and holographic paradigm. And in this one I want to parallel from science a bit of those texts that we read earlier on in 1510, 1509 and 1508. I would also like to give some more scientific stamina to what has been exposed earlier from Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard and others, to give it, so to say, a backbone, a scientific backbone. Holographic duality and the physics of consciousness. This paper introduces a novel dual aspect theory of consciousness that is based on the principle of holographic duality in modern physics and explores the prospects of making philosophically significant empirical discoveries about the physical correlates of consciousness. And as we've gone through before, speaking about perception and thinking, so this is closely related to also the question from Hans Rehn about the inner and the outer. The theory is motivated by an approach that identifies certain anti-physicalist problem intuitions associated with representational content and spatial location, and attempts to provide these with a consciousness-independent explanation, while suspending questions about the hard problem of consciousness and the more problematic phenomenal character. Providing such topic-neutral explanations is hard enough to make a philosophical difference, and yet easy enough to be approached scientifically. I will argue that abstract algorithms are not enough to solve this problem, and that a more radical computation that is inspired by physics and that can be realized in strange metals may be needed. While speculative, this approach has the potential to both establish necessary connections between structural aspects of conscious mental states and the physical substrate generating them. And explain why this representational content is nowhere to be found. I will end with a reconsideration of the conceivability of zombies. And especially the last two sentences are very pertinent. We will be discussing the grounds for the inner in Heidegger and in Wittgenstein. What is generating the originator of thoughts, the primal mover, and then explain why this representational content is nowhere to be found, which we discussed also. Whereas wherever we look, we cannot find an inside that corresponds to the acts we are doing or what we are saying. But if there is a kind of inherent necessary connection between being the kind of cognitive system we are and the possession of requisite experience, then the problem seems much less serious. What kind of metaphysics this would involve is not clear. The idea would be that there is something in the nature of intentional scripts of the kind we instantiate that necessitates an experiential reflection of it. A script that is necessarily produced as a movie. In a way, this might be a form of pan-protopsychism as applied to certain informational states. Intentional scripts, as Levin mentioned here, is the same as internal speech, or the separatedness of the inner, as pointed out in Heidegger and Hans Rein's text, where there is no connection and our innerness is solely representing what is out there. A passive perception that most certainly usually makes for an active rationality. Something that we questioned before. Prologue. We seem to have good reasons to believe that consciousness is physical, and good reasons to believe that it is not. This paradoxical situation is referred to by Stoljar 2009 as our epistemic situation or predicament, and following post-Newtonians like Priestley, who claim that we do not know enough about the physical to conclude that consciousness is not physical. Stoljar's solution to this epistemic dilemma is to separate the consciousness problem in two: a scientific empirical one and a philosophical one, aiming to explain our anti-physicalists' intuitions. And these two sides are very close to what is seen in Heidegger as Vorhanden and Zuhanden. Explaining away such problem intuitions is crucial to non-reductive physicalism, eliminativism, and strong illusionism. And also to the conceivability of zombies. Zombies is of course very close to the Wittgensteinian meaning blind man or the perception blind man. Such explanations can be psychological, computational, structural, neurological, or cultural. One satisfying class of explanations appeals to the riches of physics. and embrace a version of Stoljar's ignorance hypothesis. Holding that we are ignorant of physical facts relevant to consciousness, whose knowledge would explain away our anti-physicalist intuitions. The IH comes in different versions that depend on how broad we take the physical to be. The physics may refer to our standard physics or to a non-standard physics that includes intrinsic or proto-phenomenal properties. In this paper, unless I say otherwise, I will embrace a first-order approximation of the ignorance hypothesis that takes the physical to be standard. Let's call the physical facts that the IH appeals to, IH standing for ignorance hypothesis, S facts after Stoljar. The discovery of such facts is important in its own right, because there are good reasons to believe that providing a physical explanation of our anti-physicalist intuitions will constrain solutions to the hard problem. As facts, are not easy to imagine, but easier to imagine than the facts needed for a physical explanation of consciousness. To see why S-facts are hard to conceive of, consider Papineau's critique of the HI. Stoljar is here placing strong demands on the content of our ignorance. It must be such that if we only knew the relevant non-experiential facts, this would render zombies inconceivable. However, it is not clear that any non-experiential facts could play this role. By their nature, non-experiential facts would seem to be third personal, objective and non-perspectival, while experiential facts are first personal, subjective and perspectival. When you hear the word perspectival, think of the duck rabbit. The idea that the subject is the one who perceives different aspects, whereas the third personal objective has only one aspect. It is hard to see how knowledge of the former could automatically render the absence of the latter inconceivable. It is therefore quite possible that no physical facts can be both strange enough to explain our problem intuitions and standard physical enough to count as standard. So you see here, there's a very similar problem within science as the problems we mentioned in the last 20 episodes. And it seems to amount to this complete contrast between what is physical and non-physical, to be compared to inner and outer, or why not tradition and modernity. There's going to be a lot of technical jargon, so I'm going to make a leap in the text, as I've done before, to introduction. And then I go to the meta problem of consciousness. This is page 3, just to give you a structure to the lecture. And it's the subtitle Introduction, conveniently enough. The biggest obstacle standing in the way of a mathematical formalization of experience is probably related to David Chalmers' structure and dynamics argument, and similar to mathematics is structural, B. Structure can only yield more structure. Consciousness is not structural. D. Conclusion. Mathematics cannot describe consciousness. This, of course, flies in the face of Max Tegmark, so highly criticized by Sabine Hossenfelder. He thinks that we are mathematics, even our souls. One way to reject this conclusion is to reject the first premise by arguing that mathematics may indeed include non-structural entities too. Another way out is to reject the third premise and search for relevant structural aspects of conscious experience. I will follow the second path and concentrate on 3 points of contact between mathematics, modeling, and experience. 1. Distinguishing two major properties of consciousness: the non-structural phenomenal character common to all conscious states, and the more structural representational content that differentiates conscious state. Distinguishing between the hard problem of consciousness and the more empirical meta problem of consciousness. The second is very close to the Heideggerian-Wittgensteinian approach. Three. Searching for physics that is rich enough to solve the meta problem. And that is, of course, what we've been looking for through the whole series. I think this is a very good summary of what the problem is. And it is the scientific side of the philosophical problems that we've been discussing so far. I will now go to page 9. And there we will see a little bit more of the suggestion made by Uziel here. Uziel Awret. And I think you're going to find it very interesting. I'll just get some water here. So I'm now going into the rather progressive and radical solution, the kernel of the point here. Now we got it so neatly structured in the beginning here. And it's page 9, second paragraph, holographic duality and strange metals. Duality. In their introduction to Special Issues of Dualities, Castellani and Rickles begin with dueling concepts in the Chinese cosmology and compare these to an analogous duality in science. In Chinese cosmology, the various phenomena of the universe are then viewed as an interplay of these dueling concepts. Further, the two sides are inextricably entangled and interdependent. Neither making complete sense without the other. There is no sense of one side of the dual pair being more fundamental or superior. So Ricus and Castellani are going to Chinese cosmology for their solution. So seems to be the case with dualities in science, with a similar entanglement holding together dueling concepts such as hot, cold, big, small, high energy, low energy, finite, infinite, composite, elementary, localized, delocalized, etc. Though in such a way that an equivalence holds between them at some level. In general, one finds that some quantity and its reciprocal are involved in a duality mapping. There is then mystery in dualities, in making sense how there can be equivalence given such apparently stark differences. Yet, within this mystery, there lies a golden opportunity for philosophers. And I think you can recognize here the yin and yang symbol. Duality in mathematics and physics is not a theorem or a law of nature, but a deep principle. that excels at carving nature at the joints, so to speak. In mathematics, it has been used for hundreds of years and continuously adapted and evolved, undergoing successive generalizations that guided progress in geometry, algebra, and analysis. In physics, duality enters the scene with Maxwell's equations invariance to a duality transformation that exchanges the electrical field E with a magnetic field B and B with minus E when no sources are present. Later with wave-particle duality in quantum mechanics, and finally with the Kramers-Vannier duality in 1941 that yielded a simple way to predict phase transitions in the 2D Ising model. Quantum field theory then presented us with new dualities, like the Monton and Olive duality in 1977. While dualities became central to string theory, with S duality, T duality, and especially the mysterious N theory, in which all 5 different string theories were shown to be cross-sections of the same currently unknown theoretical object related to each other by duality transformation. Go to the quote here by Burczynski. Dualities between field theories and dualities between string theories are remarkable, taking quantum field theory and string theory far beyond the perturbative descriptions. A duality between a field theory and a string theory might seem to be impossible on several grounds. String theories require 10 dimensions, whereas renormalizable field theories do not seem to exist in dimensions greater than 4. String theories seem to contain many more degrees of freedom than quantum field theory, from the infinite number of internal states of the string. And string theories contain quantum gravity with its many conceptual puzzles, while renormalizable quantum field theory do not. Well, prepare to be amazed. And that, of course, was a lot of technical jargon. But the taking in of opposition started actually with Maxwell and was brought into quantum mechanics in the 1920s and has been further developed into different fields like QFT, quantum field theory, but also string theory that actually make use of vortices, vortex. Duality in physics can be seen as a symmetrical transformation relating different theories of the same entity. Unlike ordinary global and local symmetries that leave physics invariant with respect to solutions to the same theory, under this duality, the observable physics is invariant under exchange of theories. Duality is therefore a more radical symmetry than that can relate different physical theories in different space dimensions, while maintaining a strict but highly counterintuitive bijective mapping between fields, expectation values, and other relevant physical variables. The more we know about the structure of physics and math, the more central the role duality plays in acquiring this knowledge. However, the connections between the notion of duality and philosophy, especially philosophy of mind, are less well established. It is a question that is completely cast to the side, not to be mentioned. Despite their ubiquity and importance in physics, mathematics, and logic, it is fair to say that philosophers have yet to embrace dualities with the gusto they deserve. This is particularly unfortunate since dualities connect to a great many issues that philosophers have fully embraced. To name a few notable examples: reduction, emergence, and fundamentality. Two, theoretical equivalence and synonymy. Underdetermination and empirical evidence equivalence. Realism versus anti-realism. And unification of mathematics and physics. And now I will go to strange metals on the same page, 1010, last paragraph with the subtitle Strange Metals, conveniently. Strange Metals. In 2007, Sachdev and his collaborators were trying to understand the properties of 2D high temperature superconducting copper oxides named cuprates, rusted copper, that displayed quantum critical behavior, namely scale invariance, as we remember from fractality, which made them describable by a conformal quantum field theory in 2 dimensions. When these materials were heated above their superconducting phase, they displayed unexpected transport properties, Nernst effect, and an electronic state of matter that can be described as irreducibly many particle entangled compressible matter. These cuprates were dubbed strange metals because this electronic phase of matter exhibited conduction without quasi-particles and fast hydrodynamics typical of quark-gluon liquids. The use of standard perturbative quantum field theory approaches proved intractable, but they realized that the conformal quantum field theory has a gravitational dual with an ADS quantum field 3 correspondence, or a CFT3, I should say more correctly. Defying reason, they decided to borrow from the mathematical machinery of string theory and perform the same calculation in the dual gravitational space with an extra dimension containing a dionic black hole, itself a solution of the Einstein-Maxwell equations. To their surprise, the calculation explained the peculiar transport of heat and electricity typical of these strange metals, and agreed with experiments. In the beginning they must have thought that this is a case of the same math coincidentally describing completely different phenomena, and that the dual gravitational space was not real in any sense. But their findings drew more attention and scrutiny, bringing a flood of results that is impossible to review here. Let us just say that these results connected the strange metal state of such cuprates to many electron states with Planckian dissipation and minimal viscosity. Which is typical of quark-gluon plasmas and fast hydrodynamic configurations. Maximally entangled states, instant thermalization and maximal entropy production that sets limits on physical computability. On the ADS side of the duality, strange metals became important as quantum computing devices, enabling string theorists to test string-based hypotheses about the quantum gravity, black hole thermodynamics, the information paradox, the emergence of space-time and more, as an example of the unreasonable success attributed to what terms as the ADS-CMT correspondence. A quote from Zanen: "It is perhaps the greatest success of ADS-CFT correspondence that Einstein gravity can be used as a generating functional to determine hydrodynamical equations. The above is, of course, a particular basics example, but at present this method is used with significant practical consequence by reassessing particularly complicated forms of hydrodynamics." So there were, of course, a lot of technical jargon here, and I will make first a short summary, then I will try to make an explanation on the whiteboard. But let me just say that this is the duality turning up in physics itself, where the opposing qualities that were found in this strange metal that now is participating hugely in quantum computing is actually showing that nature itself has this most mysterious dual character, and to understand it we have to make our understanding itself dual. As you can see, there is a connection here between science and the philosophy that we dwelled very deeply into the last 100 episodes or so. So we have a sort of scientific backbone to rest our arguments, to give them the stamina that only science can give, but also a greater understanding that involves both the outer, that we usually refer to the physical, and seeing that the inside is as well physical as well as mental. And this is oddly enough the result of this copperate metal. It has the characteristics of having two aspects at the same time, and that is also necessary, which makes it even more anti-logical, so to speak. I put a little pause there with help of Kalle. Well, that was a rather tough jargon text, so to speak, and I will do my best to put it to everyday language so you get the grasp of it. Earlier, we've been talking about how dualities are of great importance in philosophy, in religion, touching the Pauline letters. We've been discussing it earlier on in neurology. And also Jan Eiskens have been looking into the fascia of our very body constituents. And at an instance, we will also look at Raymond A. Dart's spiral theory of the body that is confirmed today. Here we have from the side of physics, which is the foundational for what we sort of extract from philosophy, neurology, psychology, and who is the judge of everything. Without having that backbone, the questions become superficial, and so does the answers, because it's still science that calls the shots. What I want to show here, that within science itself there is dualism, not only as a property, but also necessary. It builds physics. We mentioned earlier about chirality, how it builds up the physical structure of the universe. The man who was fried on a chicken, Damota, demonstrated that the smallest subatomic particles are consisting of chirality, a handedness, which is duality. In this improved depiction, thank you Kalle, of the yin and yang symbol, one can clearly see that there is a movement going on, and it is clockwise in this yin and yang symbol. And think of it as a hand. I've done this so many times. Think of it as a hand that is touching the other, making one subject and the other one object. One is perceiver and the other one is the perceived. They are dancing, so to speak. And that's the movement of perception, of the subject understanding itself, so to speak. The couplets are double-sided. That's why they are so excellent in constructing quantum computers. The duality is inhabited in the material, and even so the material is duality. So our mission, so to speak, during the lecture series has massive support, to say the least, from physics. The Maxwell equation already has in it a duality of existence and non-existence, which is absolutely necessary for understanding electromagnetism, constructing electromagnetic devices as we do all over the world today. Oppositions deeply embedded in the most fundamental physics, to the very core. And this is as far as we can come from the ideas of the late 19th century, where, for instance, Lord Kelvin thought there was just a decimal missing and the whole of physics would be completed. It is just the opposite. we are today completely dependent on dualities in physics. That is what builds physics. Handedness, it's a very good way for handing over the understanding. Excuse me the pun, but it was intended. Hand over this most pertinent and extremely important knowledge to the layman, to the public. I wonder whether the philosophers are aware of this. The ones we've been reading, at least part of them, are most probably not aware that their philosophy is much more decisive than they think. Heidegger and Derrida, Merleau-Ponty, are very close to where physics are today. And this, something taken up earlier, even at the very onset of this series by Arkady Plotnitsky, using Derrida and Georges Bataille. But now we have much more names, and we found supports in a variety of subjects. Neurology, biology, physiology, our own makeup, so important for our health to understand the duality of our bodies, to get that spiraling upper direction I often repeat. But also down to the foundational level of doing a phenomenological study, as we've been doing, spending time on going into the Pauline letters, seeing it through Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and so on. And one thing that struck me is that Nietzsche would have been resolved by his inner pain had he understood the importance of oppositions. He would not be cast into this hole of madness that he succumbed to in the end. He would have been saved. And I see here, using big words for a morning hour, but I see here an opportunity to make a dual carriage. One horse, physics, and the other one, philosophy, thinking, understanding. And they will draw the carriage to the future, making the future. Not a standstill. And the culprit is definitely one of those things that nobody really knows about, but it's everywhere now. Maybe a comment or a question from Kalle. Make a change here.
Thank you, Hans.
I try to get you into the picture.
Excuse me, I will also take the paper. I have it in my hand. This paper by Uziel Awret, who is in Alexandria, Virginia. Holographic Duality and the Physics of Consciousness. I find the problematic that the word duality is not defined. While I would say duality, we have two kinds of dualities, in my understanding. Okay, so one is, we could call this a duality. This is an Eastern duality, and then we could call, let's say, Western duality. We could say think about our position like between man and a woman. Let's say man and a woman. Let's say this is a duality, or whatever. It could be something else. In the Western thinking is you have a wall here. While in the Eastern thinking you have a wave, so they are complementary. As we have in the Code of Arts by Niels Bohr, his Code of Arts has this motto: contrary sunt complementa, that is, contrary things are complementary. While in Western thinking, they are absolutely not complementary. We see, I could quote Alan Emreen, our Swedish physicist, who says that a cat has three possibilities. It's either alive or dead, or both. But he emphasizes that the cat is either alive to 100%. But I'm asking Allah, so to say, how can something be 100% living? There's no such thing as something is 100% living. Perhaps only God, but not we. As Heidegger emphasized, man is, we die every day, so to say. There is nobody who is 100% living. So I don't understand this. Something is 100% living. And for me, it doesn't make sense. Okay, I understand his point, but he's reasoning in this Western thinking. So something is 100% man, 100%. While, let's say, a Chinese or Eastern Japanese, he would say perhaps in every man there is perhaps 1% of woman or something like that. So this is. So how would I say? I don't want to make a language game, so to say. But I would say that the Western thinking, this is dualism in our sense, perhaps. This is more like complementarity. And I would say, I would like to call this complementary. Yes, and you have in this code, Niels Bohr's Code of Arts, the motto, context of complementarity. He doesn't say a word about dualism. Because I don't say this is dualism. So this is, okay, that was my. And I would like to say something that you said on page 3 on this paper about David Chalmers. It was a good point by David Chalmers that you have, he says that mathematics is about structure, and structure gives more structure, while consciousness is non-structural, doesn't have structure. So therefore, mathematics cannot help consciousness. This is a good point, of course. Speaking of numbers and mathematics, and let's say that you could say that mathematics you have, let's say 0 and plus you have here -1. You could say perhaps say this is, you have a dichotomy here, or dualism, let's say between 0 and 1, but they're actually complementary, because you cannot think about about number 1 without 0. So there is always a trace between them. Also science, I would say. So this is dualism or complementary in my sense, but there's always a trace of something else. So there are not oppositions in with the wall, like here in this thinking, in science either. Okay, please.
Very good, Carl. Thank you very much. Yes, it is a fidget of normal sense imagination to think of this strict wall, and it doesn't apply. Yes, doesn't apply to physics. And the couplet is both physical, and then when we hear the word physical, we think about the wall, and on one side being the pH of physical. Absolutely out there, no connection to the subject, consciousness. That is in a nutshell the hard problem. But the couplet is both a metal device and information. They go completely into each other, just as the yin and yang symbol. We can make the distinction, they can be distinct when needed, but it's very good, as you mentioned, and I see it also at here, there is the tendency of the other side going into the first side. The female principle of yin is always going into the yang principle, the masculine. And I think these divisions, they live, and I said it before, they live even harder among common people. We who are not physicists, they often believe in those divisions even harder than the scientists today, which is something we want to change with this series, bringing almost a miraculous understanding to everyday people and philosophers alike. There's one of the points here, that it needs to be informed also for philosophy, to give it a backbone, to give it more credibility. And when I think of it, it could be one of the reasons why academia has been so eroded. Because since science is only calling the shots, and most people don't know what science is saying now, that it supports these things, the credibility, the foundational credibility of all academia is undermined by itself. I do remember a philosophy lecture a couple of years ago, where the professor asked, when we had a philosophical question, what does science say in this instance, in this context? And somebody raised and gave a classical, non-dual explanation, which seemed to be the default mode, the standard mode. And it doesn't help, so to speak. It makes it harder to put your foot down and to grasp duality with your whole system. As Merleau-Ponty says, it needs to be embodied. Distance is something we feel with our whole entity. Med hela vårt väsen, I like the Swedish term there. And that is body, soul and spirit. And this makes this possible, actually. Not only to believing, but to trusting, to be able to relax in this certainty, to give comfort in a way that most philosophy would be impotent to do today because of their dependency of the classical model, which still is out there, still is taking the domineering role, and nowadays it fits like hand in glove with his sharp distinctions, as Kalle pointed out, where there is absolutely no connection whatsoever. And I'd say that goes for Cartesian space as well. Cartesian space is the everyday experience, the default mode of understanding for most people, if not all. And it's been seeping down for generations. We're speaking 3 centuries now. Kalle, some adding comment? Put a pause and we'll continue. I will sum up here and we'll have time for some questions. And now at the discussion at page 13. The SMT, the strange metal theory, is a consciousness realist theory that handles the meta-challenge by accepting a separate spatiotemporal unfolding of the radically different consciousness process and meta process, while showing that they realize the same information. Here, very pertinent is that it is the same information. The physical aspect and what we would call mental or abstracted aspect is exactly the same. Exactly. I believe that we know and say what we know and say about consciousness has something to do with the way consciousness really is, and showing that we would probably make conscious and problem reports even if we were not conscious threatens this belief and the very foundations of our self-knowledge. And one definite proponent here in my comment is, of course, Daniel Dennett, who do not know about the duality of matter, neither does he accept consciousness at all. So he chooses either the male or female, as in the example of Kalle here, one side only. Leading, of course, to an immensity of paradoxes and contradictions by itself. I believe that what we know and say about consciousness has something to do with the way consciousness really is, and showing that we would probably make conscious and problem reports even if we were not conscious, threatens these beliefs and the very foundations of our self-knowledge. And I'll add to it, it threatens philosophy, all higher thinking and academia as such, undermining it by almost forced contradictions, irresolvable in the common mind. However, SMT relies on two parallel processes realizing the same information. Think of a hologram varying continuously over time, creating a 2D hologramic movie of sorts, and consider its dual 3D holographic counterpart. In strange metal theory, these movies cannot act on each other in any way, and a frame in one movie can only be influenced by the other frames in the same movie. Entities in one space may map in a complex and non-local manner onto dual entities in the dual space that may be very different. That is the hologrammatic aspect. And we be careful not to confuse the 2D with the 3D. That would lead to the intractable conclusion that they are opposing. This is quite close. You can make a close parallel here to the language game of perception and the language game of explaining your perceptions or your experiences. They are different. There is a relation, but they are inherently very different. It's exactly the same as a globe of the earth is not the earth. While it's true that the action of vocal cords generating conscious reports are not caused by consciousness, but by very different non-conscious 2+1 or 3+1 dimensional processes describable by quantum field theory. In the corresponding, CFT, in the corresponding 3+1 or 4+1 dimensional dual ADS phenomenal space. Here, a topic neutral space that can be given a more classical geometrical interpretation. The conscious reports are caused by consciousness. This is what we've been speaking about when we mention the Klein bottle. It is a three-dimensional object that can be depicted in 2 dimensions, but mainly it works in 3 dimensions. The depiction can be a helpful pedagogical tool, as I brought up in 1510, the previous lecture, but it is not the same. So what is happening in the computer is the strange metal, the cuprate, is creating a three-dimensional space within information itself, doing the movement of the subject touching the object. This very process is the computational process, the understanding process. That one is different from how we describe it. It is not the same thing. And we mentioned that in chapter 3 in Paul Johnston's Wittgenstein Rethinking the Inner, that describing one's thinking in terms of letters, words or imagery is not the same process that's happening inside the head or in one's consciousness. That confusion is made by many philosophers of consciousness, not only Dennett, but also the couples Churchland, and I think there is a majority of people doing that. We need tools to describe something, and that is usually what we call 2D, but reality is one singular primal depth dimension. The depth dimension is what Uziel here is pointing to. Uziel, sorry, is showing that from a metal, which is the most physical you can think of, comes information, which is the most abstract, completely separated in every thinking. But it is exactly the same. These sharp differences, these sharp contradictions, they get smoother. And when the sharpness disappears, there is a relaxation in the body and in the thinking as well. We can see how they intermingle, how the female aspect goes into the male aspect, and how that intermingling is not stopped by a complete wall. It is instead encouraged by, in this case, the strange metal theory, or in quantum mechanics, the duality of wave and particle. And this, as you can see, I think now goes so nicely hand in hand with the philosophical exposure that we made, where usually a person like Paul is interpreted in strict contradictions that makes him anti-Jewish or pro-Jewish, maybe someone has interpreted this, but it is an intermingling of the both. As is when it comes to tradition, the tradition breaker Paul is also a preserver of tradition. He is injecting newness, modernity into the traditional. Newness could be the yin, and the traditional could be the yang side. And they help each other, reinforcing each other. In a way, we are back to Heraclitus. Fire and water, life and death, day and night, summer and winter. We also mention in the lecture series many times, and I hope to get back to him in McGilchrist. Be nice to have a lecture of him. How the two brain halves, instead of being contradictional to each other, could cooperate, intermingle with each other. Being able to be different as well as being the same simultaneously. And I think with the strange metal theory and also this chaos theory by John Briggs and F. David Peat, also mentioned before, they can be brought together from the realm of physics, thereby strengthening them, making them more telling. All of a sudden, there is a stronger voice speaking, and quite literally more grounded on the sitting bones, if you like, where I sit, where I talk and address you. I address you from myself. That is the subject, reaching into the exterior. I will jump and read a little bit if time still is there.
So far 1 hour 53, so you should really finish it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Uziel also calls this that this is a topic neutral physical solution. It doesn't take a stance. We cannot be accused of a particular philosophical approach or physical approach or political, if you like. And that makes it easier to sort of seep into the consciousness of people. It becomes digestible, if you like, acceptable, and of course when we bring in these things, they will be easily acceptable. They will begin to speak their own voice in a very strong way. I'll bring in my colleague here, Kalle, for some questions or maybe some comments.
Thank you for this presentation by this paper by Uziel Awret. You should feel Awret for Uziel Awret for this, for discussing this very difficult topic. Uziel Awret, he quotes a paper by 2 scholars. He has an extensive quotation from this paper, so I think it's good. I went to the original paper. It's written by Heidegger1511, Elena Castellani at Department of Humanities and Philosophy, University of Florence, Italy, and then co-authored with Dean Rickles, University of Sydney, Australia. And the paper is called Introduction to Special Issue on Dualities. And there you have one word that I saw that was interesting. That is, it's about these dualities are like hot, cold, big, small, etc., etc. Though in such a way that an equivalence holds between them at some level. That is the same quotation that you have on page 9 in this paper. So there is an equivalence at some level, and that made me think about drawing hands by Escher. You have their equivalence on some level between the two hands, which are drawing each other, so to say. But there is also another level, as we have here, that is the Escher himself, who's concealed. He's on a meta level above the drawing. So okay, so you have a duality on this level, on this inferior level, if you call it. But there is a higher unifier, so to say, Escher himself, or the modern viewer of the artwork. So there is always, so when we think about duality or complementarity, we should also think about levels. There are different levels of that could be unified. For instance, the famous cat in the box. So okay, it's one level, it's dead, living, but it's at the same time both living and dead at the same time. And that perhaps is the meta level in one sense. Or perhaps the observer is the meta level. But I think that the meta level in this specific case is perhaps the state of being both and. That is the zero in mathematics. And now zero in the mathematics would be what the computers you have 0, 1, and then 0 and 1 at the same time. So that is that's perhaps the meta level in one sense. I don't know if you would agree with that.
It is exactly what it is. Very good color. This is the 3D mentioned by Uziel here. That is either, as you say, the subject, but is also the meta level. The 1 and the 0 together. And very good here with Escher's hands, because Escher himself is the meta level. The two contradictions, when taken in, makes possible, so to speak, a meta level. Something beyond. Something higher, if you like. You can also see, I think Douglas Hofstad has called it the strange loop. A little bit like the soul peeking out of his hidden corner and making him or herself visible once more. That is awareness, that is consciousness, the meta level. Very hard, and I think Daniel Dennett and Coppers Churchland would agree with that. I did maybe 10 years ago. With the contradiction, it's very hard to accept consciousness, because you have this either or only, which doesn't hold for a meta level. If you say either or, either male or female, only. But here, there is a movement, the subject, and the meta level. Quite excellent color. Thank you very much. Fantastic. I have nothing more to add. It's just great. Thank you very much for today, and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.